Obari Gamba is a Nigerian poet and playwright and the author of Thunder Protocol and Length of Eyes, which was longlisted for the Nigerian Prize for Literature. He teaches at the University of Port Harcourt, has facilitated writing workshops for the 2014 UNESCO World Book Capital, and in 2016 was a resident in the International Writing Program.
Hello, class. My name is Dr. Obari Gamba. I'm a Nigerian and I teach literature and creative writing at the University of Port Harcourt in Nigeria. I am here as part of the International Writing Program in the city of Iowa, and this is a very wonderful experience for me. All right, so I write poetry, I write drama, I write plays, and I also do a bit of fiction. But because I teach creative writing across the genres, I guess that I have a bit of experience about some of these things, and I've also been able to organize a writing workshop for the UNESCO World Book Capital in the year 2014. Today we're going to be talking about caste and community in fiction, and that's specifically about character and characterization, and it's a topic I like to talk about because I think it's a topic that is very, very central to literary creation, particularly with regard to the making of stories as a very key aspect, key category of literature. So I have been able to work this little talk around 10 simple points. Don't look at them as 10 commandments, they're not supposed to be. But I think that these 10 rules are important. You can consider them as 10 principles. If they are principles that you are already familiar with, fine. But the truth is that it's important that we re-emphasize them. If you're familiar with them, we re-emphasize them so as to make you know that you're on the right track. And if you're not very familiar with these principles and you've been working from the guts, fine. Maybe you're going to be a lot more deliberate about how you create characterization based on our conversation today. Now, the first thing I want to call your attention to is that a character is a personality that lives in a story. Okay? A character does not arrive in a story by accident. Now, what this means is that it is a responsibility of the author to put the character in a story deliberately. And this implies that the writer has a responsibility to shape a character to a specific purpose. And that is why the word caste is very important to us. It's a word that has become very familiar to people in theater, people in drama. But in truth, that is what every writer who aspires to create a narrative does. You call characters into performance and you set them in specific roles. So the author has to set each character to a specific role or to a set of specific roles that can drive the whys and wherefores of a story. Okay? Now, why is this important? Literature is not like a plant in the wild. Literature is not a plant on the rooftop. It is like a garden plant. Okay? So you plant it on purpose, you water it on purpose, and you groom it on purpose. This purpose must match with your creativity. So if you're hoping to cast an astounding character in your story, it will depend on your ability to create one. So do not count on chance or on an accident for your success. You have to be deliberate, you have to be diligent, and you have to be creative. Point number 2. A character can be a human being, it can be an animal, it can also be extra-human or subhuman. All right. Now, these character types can be combined. Okay. You can use one type, you can use a combination of two types, you can use a combination of all the types. And I need to draw your attention to two examples look at George Orwell's Animal Farm. I mean, it's a novel that has achieved canonical acclaim for the representation of human and animal characters in that narrative. And then we also have a writer called Amos Totula, the author of The Palm Wine Drinker, who has been able to combine human and extra-human, subhuman characters in his story. Now, what these both authors have done is to adapt the strategy of the allegory. Okay, and this is not new. It is not new. It's a strategy that has been in existence from the earliest narrators who attempted to make their stories from the standpoint of the fable. So, and it dates back to the origin of mankind itself, our earliest attempt to make narratives. Okay, so this is long before remembered time. And in recent times, we'll find that writers have come to be more and more aware of the fact that there is a beauty of God complex in the creative process. Every piece of narrative is a making of a universe. And so you must be careful to make characters in the image of humanity. Okay? And this is an archetypal instinct. It dates back to, if you look at the Greek literary tradition, you find out that all the deities are actually made in the images of mankind. So let me try to strip this bare a bit. Every writer is at liberty to cast the characters that will push his or her story to good effect, and any character type is permitted. But each character type must respond to humanity and also must cause humanity to respond to it. And this is regardless of the context, of the scope of a story, and regardless of the latitude of its human conformity or non-conformity. Now, it is not every time that, because we've also established that you can have non-human, you can have extra-human characters. So it is not every time that you find characters that are truly entirely human in our stories. But the margin between similarity and dissimilarity in our stories must be such that allows being and unbeing to be structured in the way that connects with humanity. And one of the examples I want to call your attention to is the sample of Grendel. Grendel is a monster in a narrative called Beowulf. But if you look at that character, non-human as it is, it aims its significance from the fact that it has this otherness or antithesis pitched against humanity in that narrative. So for a character to have event in the story, it must respond to humanity and cause humanity to respond to it. Now, the easier way to achieve this is to make all parts within the story to cross one another. And allegory achieves this intersection by making man and beast to speak and act alike as in Animal Farm, or man and spirit to speak and act alike as in The Palm Wine Drinker. And the point that is important to us is that if a writer is able to sufficiently apply this strategy, the gaps in this mode of representation will be sufficiently filled by humankind's suspension of disbelief. 3. A character is called a character because a character must possess characterization. It's simple. It is impossible to have a character without a personality. And so the query is, how logical is this personality? If a character is full of contradictions, that's fine, as long as the author has crafted this character specifically to fit into that purpose, into that design. So it is the author's or the writer's responsibility to design the attributes of a character. This design is what we call characterization, which indicates the makeup or the making of a character. Characterization is the identity that marks out each character. For instance, if you have a doctor in a story, that doctor has to speak and act as a doctor unless the doctor is sick or fraudulent or drunk or under some kind of pressure. So literary scholars call this verisimilitude, meaning that a story must have a resemblance with reality. And if it fails to do so, there must be sufficient internal logic within that story to show why it has failed to do so. So, to wrap this up a bit, identity has specific features: name, gender, age, marital status, ancestry, place of origin, place of abode, education and skill set, profession, public participation, travel, communication, health status, temperament, courage. Okay, now these are examples of the things that make every identity, every character stand out. And each of these elements is a very key factor that can stretch the story to very fascinating limits. For instance, if a character's name is Lisa, why is she Lisa? Who gave her the name? Her father? Her mother? Did her mother have an actress that was a very particular person and she decided to name her daughter after Lisa? Is she named after one of her grandmothers? Which of her grandmothers? Is she comfortable with the name? Is it a name that she's given to herself in revolt to the name that her parents gave to her? And this will be strands in the story that will be interesting to your reader. And then if you take gender, gender is a very powerful thing because biology is a conditioner. Once you're born into the world as a man, there are a set of things that you have to contend with. I mean, they could be cultural, they could be systemic, and they're different in a number of ways from the way a woman comes into existence and negotiates her place in the world. So, each of these features that we have mentioned is very, very, very important. How old is the person? Is the person young? If the person is young, is the person within the school age? Okay. If the person is old, and then we'll ask a lot of questions. Is the person healthy? Is the person sick? Is the person employed? I mean, all these go into the character makeup of a character and makes the character more appealing to us when we encounter them in the story. So, the features we have mentioned define a character, and the features must be clear or unclear to the extent of the story's content. Okay. Four, there are three ways by which we can create a character. And we have to take our bearing a bit from traditional criticism. Traditional criticism will tell us that we can know a character from the standpoint of a narrator, that is the point of view of the narrator. We can know a character from the comments of other characters about a character, and then we can also know a character from what the character says and does within a story. Okay, so these are strategies too by which a writer can reveal characterization. Every good character has to combine all these elements. Okay, the narrator will say some things about them. Other characters within the story will say some things about them. They will say things and do things that will help to project their revelation in the story. So naturally, the narrative voice is the writer's surrogate. It is a voice that makes the writer able to primarily determine the identity and characterization of the figures in the story. So from what is said to what is unsaid, a character's identity is revealed. From what is known to what is unknown, each character's presence is defined. Every piece of information that is revealed or withheld must fit into the given character's makeup. It is important that characters should talk about one another, okay? And sometimes this will come from the standpoint of bias. But the bias and perception of one character sheds light on the identity of other characters within the story. And so we also have to measure what these characters say on the basis of their reliability. And if a character represents or misrepresents another character, it also has a way of reflecting on the image of a character that is speaking within the story. So this is because utterance and action are processes of individuation in every story. So a lot can be known about a character from what that character says or does in the story. As a writer, you have to be careful about what you make characters say and what you make them do, okay? Because it is going to help the reader to know what they are. So you have to be deliberate about the words you put in their mouths and the actions you set them to perform. So let's look at a very small conversation. It's a short conversation between two persons. Mary and I have been married for 5 years. Johnson told the lawyer. Do you have children? The lawyer asked. None. Is that why you want a divorce? Not at all. I just can't stand our tongue anymore. Oh, I see. Tell me more. All right, this is a very brief conversation, but it helps us to know a few things about Johnson. He is married, he is not happy with his marriage, and he is consulting a lawyer. It also helps us to know a few things about the lawyer. I mean, we don't have his name in the story yet at this point, but you see him, he's able to ask some probing questions that show that he's trying to be a bit professional. He's trying to get to the root of the crisis in order to form an opinion about the case that has come to him. So it's a brief conversation, but it tells us a lot, okay, about the two persons in this conversation. Point number 5 is that there can be no great story without great characterization. The stories that have imparted on us are the stories that have characters that we can remember. So I call this the rememberableness of characters. It's a very funny term, so you have to pardon my neologism. But the point is, your characters must be characters that we can remember. And I'll have to point to 2 examples here. Look at the iconic African novel called Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe. To know Things Fall Apart is to know Okonkwo's story, and to know him as a character that is in contest with himself, is in contest with his community, and is also in contest with foreign intrusion. If you look at Thomas Hardy's The Mayor of Casterbridge, you also see Michael Hanchard as a character that is in contest with himself, is in contest with his community, and is also in contest with time. And the case of Thomas Hardy's novel is particularly interesting because the subtitle tells us a lot about that novel. Hardy is very careful to call the novel The Life and Death of a Man of Character, and that's significant. So name any great story you know, there must be great characterization there. So you must make effort as a writer to put memorable characters in your story. It means that a writer must be creative and selective with his or her cast of characters. And now, so as my folks say, if chicken adds no worth to the dish, do not add chicken for the sake of chicken. And there's a similar proverb that says, do not allow odd things into your pot, your soup pot, unless oddity is your artful intention. Okay? Now, the point is that as writers, we place so much emphasis on inspiration. It's a great gift to be inspired, but in truth, the greatest gift for every writer is judgment. And judgment counts in your selection of characters in your story. Point number 6, if a writer's senses are dead, a writer cannot create perceptive characters. Okay, now you know that our senses are important. I mean, our sight, our hearing, our taste, these are our senses. And they help us to perceive life and perceive existence. And that's where we get experience from. So it is important to know that it is a sum total of what you have perceived as a person that you're able to transfer into your creative process. And that's why the law says, what you do not have, you cannot give. It's a deep principle that governs creative writing too, and every creative process. Capacity will be built from experience. Your imagination will be built from experience. So a writer cannot create characters that will be more perceptive than he is. Okay? So if you have characters that are poorly created, that are not sensitive to situations, that do not represent themselves properly in relation to life and the issues of existence, it goes back to the perception, the power of perception of a writer. So the point I'm making is that the faults in the characters that we create are tied to the failure of perception on the part of the writer. So, a writer does not have to be evil to create evil in a story, but a writer must know what evil is. A writer does not have to be good. I mean, we all love to be good people, but you don't have to be good to create goodness in your story, but you have to know what goodness is. And you can extend this rule to every other passion or situation that you have to create in your story. So, let's go back to inspiration. We make a fetish of it, but in truth, it is what we know, how we know, what we do that makes the difference in every creative process. Point number 7, the power of one is the power of all. I like this principle because it's a principle that calls our attention to detail. The point is, if you cannot create your central character and your pivotal characters very properly, you cannot create a good community of characters. It's as simple as that. So, we like to have domino effect in our stories, but this domino effect can only come from the attention you pay to individual characters in your story. So if you pay attention to detail in the way you create your central character and the pivotal characters, you end up creating a community of characters that is interesting. So our characters will not be handled or may not be handled with the same depth, but every character must have the depth that is sufficient and consistent with the roles that they have in the story. Okay? So this is how to achieve a great cast of characters in your story. Eight, now that we have come to the subject of the community, you have to understand that a community only appeals to us when it makes us connect to its diverse passion and diverse vibe. Okay, so you have happiness, you have sadness, you have love, you have hate, you have anger, you have sympathy, you have fear, you have all sorts of elements playing out in every community. It's like the community of the text is like the actual human community that we are part of. Okay, so it is diversity that makes our communities appealing, and it is the diversity of the community in your story that will make it appealing. So a writer cannot afford to create a community that inspires indifference in the reader. No, that's not going to work. Okay? If a writer cannot achieve anything at all, I mean, there's nothing you can achieve. You should at least create a community that would make your reader angry. But if you can go a little further to create a community that will make your reader laugh or cry, I mean, that is a great feat. So, while you make effort to create an interesting community of characters, do not reduce your effort to just sheer affectation. I mean, exhibitionism will kill your story. It will look like a circus. You have to be a lot more subtle than that. So, I'm going to wrap this up in 2 maxims. Be careful with salt and sugar. Okay? And then again, if you're going to serve your soup to your guests, it's not your soup. Okay, so you have to price their judgment and make it sound. Go for subtlety and balance. Now, one more point on community. Connection is important. A community of characters will only achieve impact on the basis of the connection or broken connection that the characters in that community share. And by the way, don't assume that a broken connection is wrong. A broken connection is actually a very, very powerful motif in a story. It is not the absence of connection. It is only a different kind of connection. So every reader will love to see how the characters within the story fit and function within the community. What's the relationship within them? How do they advance the story? How do they relate with one another? So remember, when you bring in characters into your story, if chicken does not add what to the dish, do not add chicken for the sake of chicken. Point number 9, every element of fiction is tied to the characters in the story. This is something that we often take for granted because the story is a whole. Okay? Your point of view, your plot, your setting, foreshadowing, motivation, diction, style, dialogue, name all the elements. They cannot fly in different directions. No, they must work in concert in the same direction. Do not treat them as separate entities. They are a community of elements, so they must function together. Okay, so make them work in concert towards a great story. Point number 10, and this is our last point, and this is a bit funny. We all have questions that we would like to ask God. And sometimes in our quiet moment, we ask these questions. Okay, and it is the same thing. If you decide to write a story, you have become a kind of God, a God figure over that story. So we're going to ask you, why did you create this character like this? Why did you create that character in this pattern or in that pattern? And you will not always be there to answer our questions. So we're going to hold the story itself accountable. So to save yourself from feeling what I call the test of taste, you have to endeavor to be your own first critic. And this is a very difficult thing for writers. It is difficult for us to move a little backwards from the works we have created and evaluate our work. So, but it is important that you overcome that. You have to be deliberate with your self-assessment. Vision and blindness are important because there's something called vision and there's something called blindness. And so you cannot afford to create your own work and be blind to the faults within your own work. So what you need to do is to move backwards and then look at the characters you have created in your own image. And when you do that, there's a likelihood that you're going to see some faults in them, and then you offer them grace and redemption early enough. That's, for me, the simple way to fulfill your God complex as a writer. Thank you.